On paper, Stephanie McMahon had the perfect life. Daughter of Vince McMahon, married to Triple H, and at the top of WWE. But the reality was far darker.
I always had a feeling that I was going to lose him early.
From nearly losing Triple H to a sudden heart condition, to watching her father's empire collapse in scandal. Here is the tragic life of Stephanie McMahon, born into the machine. Stephanie McMahon was born in 1976. Her father was Vince McMahon. Her mother was Linda McMahon. Her brother Shane was born 6 years before her, in 1970. The family business was professional wrestling. Vince took over the company from his own father, Vincent J. McMahon, in the early 1980s. He rebranded it as the World Wrestling Federation. He created WrestleMania. He turned a regional promotion into a national one, and then into a global one. Linda McMahon played a key role in the business side, eventually serving as CEO and even venturing into politics with runs for the U.S. Senate. Stephanie and Shane were raised in the middle of all of it. Shane has talked about helping set up rings as a teenager. Stephanie attended board meetings as a child. From a young age, they were exposed to the backstage chaos, the physical toll on performers, the cutthroat negotiations, and the creative process that often drew from real-life inspirations. There was no separation between the family and the business. Family dinners could become creative meetings. Personal milestones could become storyline material. A birthday, a wedding, a pregnancy, all of it existed within the gravitational pull of the company. Everything that happened to the McMahons happened to WWE, and everything that happened in WWE happened to the McMahons. Wrestling, there is a term for this: kayfabe. Kayfabe means maintaining the illusion of what's real and what's not, even when the cameras are off. For most wrestlers, kayfabe is a professional obligation. You stay in character in public, you protect the business. For the McMahons, kayfabe wasn't just a performance technique, it was the architecture of daily life. The line between what was scripted and what was personal did not exist in any meaningful way. Stephanie has been candid about this in various interviews and documentaries, describing how the family's involvement in WWE created a pressure cooker environment where declining a storyline could feel like a betrayal, not just of the business, but of the family itself. Stephanie made her on-screen debut in 1999 at the age of 22. It was the peak of the Attitude Era, a period in WWE defined by edgy, adult-oriented content that pushed every conceivable boundary for the sake of ratings. The company was locked in a bitter war with rival promotion WCW, and the race for viewers had turned WWE programming into something closer to shock television than traditional sports entertainment. Beer, blood, profanity, and sexual content were the currency of the era, and into that environment walked the boss's daughter. Her first storyline cast her as the innocent daughter kidnapped by The Undertaker, a narrative that leaned heavily on her real-life identity as Vince's daughter. That evolved into something far more provocative, a scripted marriage to wrestler test, which was interrupted by revelations of a prior marriage to Triple H involving drugging and implied non-consensual elements. The storyline was fiction, but what happened next was not. Stephanie and Triple H, real name Paul Levesque, began dating during this period. They married in 2003. They had 3 daughters together. What started as a scripted angle became a real relationship and a real family. And that was the pattern with the McMahons. The scripts bled into life, and life bled back into the scripts. The company consumed the personal, digested it, and projected it back out as entertainment for millions. Shane's on-screen role followed a similar template. He played the rebellious son, clashing with Vince in matches constructed around real generational tension. In 2001, Shane purchased the rival promotion WCW in a storyline that echoed Vince's actual acquisition of the company, turning a legitimate business triumph into a televised family rivalry. Even Linda McMahon appeared in storylines, written as comatose in one arc, slapped by Vince in another. The family's real dynamics were not just referenced by the scripts, they were the foundation the scripts were built on. Vince McMahon has said it plainly in various contexts: family is business, and business is family. That philosophy drove the company to heights no one in professional wrestling had ever reached before. Pay-per-view events that drew millions of buyers, television deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a merchandise empire, a global touring schedule, and a stock market listing that turned the McMahons into one of the wealthiest families in entertainment. But the same philosophy that built WWE into a billion-dollar empire also built the conditions for everything that followed. Because when nothing is off-limits for the show, nothing is off-limits for the family either. And when the patriarch who runs the show is also the patriarch who runs the family, there is no one above him to draw the line. the storyline that crossed every line. In 2006, Stephanie McMahon was pregnant with her first child, a daughter named Aurora Rose. She was also serving as vice president of creative writing at WWE, a position that placed her at the intersection of the company's business operations and its storytelling machine. She was 29 years old. She had been part of the company her entire life, first as a child absorbing the rhythms of the business, then as a performer navigating its most provocative storylines, now as an executive responsible for shaping the narratives millions of viewers consumed each week. That year, her father pitched a storyline, the 2024 Netflix docuseries, Mr. McMahon, a 6-part exploration of Vince McMahon's life, career, and scandals released on September 25, 2024, documented the moment in vivid, unsettling detail. In episode 4, titled Attitude, Vince casually reveals that one of his storyline ideas was that Stephanie gets pregnant and that he, his character, was the one who impregnated her. He laughs about it in the documentary. He acknowledges it was rejected, but the fact that it was pitched at all by a father to his pregnant daughter about her real pregnancy tells you everything about the environment Stephanie McMahon existed in. This was not an abstract creative exercise conducted in a writer's room between strangers. This was a father looking at his daughter's pregnancy and seeing a storyline opportunity, one involving incest between his own character and hers. Stephanie rejected the pitch outright, labeling it disgusting and arguing it held no entertainment value. Vince McMahon was not just her father, he was the chairman. Saying no to him was not the same as declining a suggestion in a brainstorming session with peers. It carried the weight of professional consequence and personal confrontation, layered on top of a lifetime of family loyalty and obligation to the company that bore their name. But Vince did not stop there. When the original pitch was rejected, he reportedly countered with an alternative, revealing that her brother Shane was the fictional father of the child. The angle shifted from father-daughter incest to brother-sister incest. Stephanie rejected that as well. To understand why Vince thought any version of this pitch might fly, you have to understand the creative environment WWE had cultivated over the preceding decade. The Attitude Era had systematically normalized content that, in any other entertainment context, would have been unthinkable on mainstream television. Storylines in that period included necrophilia, the infamous segment where Triple H was involved with a mannequin inside a funeral parlor. There were allusions to bestiality. There were segments constructed around racism, misogyny, and gratuitous shock value designed to generate headlines and rating spikes. Vince's history of pushing envelopes included taboo subjects across the board, and the staggering financial success of the Attitude Era only reinforced the conviction that there was no line too sacred to cross if it meant drawing eyeballs. But an incest storyline involving his own daughter, built around her actual pregnancy, occupied a different category entirely. Even within WWE's internal culture, a culture that had tolerated, encouraged, and profited from nearly every form of shock content imaginable, this was rejected. It did not make it to television. It did not survive past Stephanie's refusal. Stephanie later reflected on this in the Mr. McMahon docuseries, calling such ideas completely disgusting. But the incident was not an anomaly. It existed within a well-documented pattern where Vince tested the furthest limits of what was permissible and routinely used his own family members as the testing ground for those experiments. The McMahons were not just the owners of the company. They were its most available raw material, always present, always obligated, and always expected to commit fully, regardless of how it felt. And the broader context makes this even more disturbing. Just 3 years earlier, in 2003, 6 days before Stephanie's real-life wedding to Triple H, Vince booked himself in a brutal I Quit match against her at No Mercy, where he bloodied her on screen. The match was violent. Stephanie was physically battered in front of a live audience and a pay-per-view viewership that numbered in the hundreds of thousands, days before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. Linda McMahon reportedly threatened divorce if Stephanie ended up with a black eye in her wedding photos. The match happened anyway. The bride-to-be was bloodied on television, and 6 days later, she walked down the aisle. In the McMahon family, these two events existed on the same continuum. One was business, one was personal. But those categories had long since lost any distinction. That was the operating principle. Nothing was off limits. Not a daughter's pregnancy, not a daughter's wedding week, not the fundamental boundary between father and child. Everything served the show, and the show never stopped asking for more. The eulogy that became a wound. On June 25, 2007, the bodies of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel were discovered at their home in Fayetteville, Georgia. Chris Benoit was one of the most respected in-ring performers in professional wrestling history. Born in Montreal in 1967, he had trained under the legendary Stu Hart in Calgary and built a reputation across promotions in Japan, ECW, and WCW before arriving in WWE in 2000. He won the World Heavyweight Championship at WrestleMania Dixdex in 2004 in a triple threat match against Triple H and Shawn Michaels, a moment widely celebrated as the crowning achievement of a career defined by relentless technical precision. Behind the scenes, years of head trauma from high-impact moves, particularly his signature diving headbutt, and reported steroid use were taking a cumulative toll that no one fully understood at the time. The double murder-suicide unfolded over a 3-day period from June 22nd to June 24. On Friday, Benoit strangled his wife in an upstairs room, placing a Bible beside her body. On Saturday, he smothered his son Daniel in the boy's bedroom, again leaving a Bible nearby. Daniel had Fragile X syndrome, a genetic condition affecting development. On Sunday, Benoit hanged himself in the basement weight room, using a cable from a weight machine. Benoit had missed WWE events that weekend, including a house show and The Vengeance, Night of Champions pay-per-view, where he was scheduled to compete for the ECW World Championship. He had sent cryptic text messages to colleagues, including Chavo Guerrero and referee Scott Armstrong, providing his home address and noting that the dogs were in the enclosed pool area and the garage side door was open. Those messages raised concern, but the initial assumption among those who received them was a family emergency, not a crime scene. WWE did not know the full picture when the bodies were found Monday afternoon. Initial reports suggested a tragic accident or undetermined cause. What WWE knew was that one of its most respected performers, his wife, and his child were dead. The company was preparing for that night's Monday Night Raw, which was supposed to feature the scripted death of Vince McMahon's character in a limousine explosion. That bombastic storyline was immediately scrapped. In its place, Vince McMahon made the decision to transform the entire broadcast into a 3-hour tribute to Benoit and his family. The tribute show aired live from Corpus Christi, Texas, starting at 8 p.m. ET, just hours after the bodies had been discovered. It opened with Vince McMahon standing alone in an empty arena. It featured career retrospectives, match highlights spanning Benoit's years in the company, and pre-recorded eulogies from wrestlers and executives who had worked alongside him. Backstage, however, the mood was not unanimous. Wrestlers like JBL, The Undertaker, and Stone Cold Steve Austin confronted Vince McMahon about the possibility that Benoit was responsible for the deaths, urging caution. Vince, facing an incomplete picture and a live broadcast that was already underway, went forward with the tribute. Stephanie McMahon, then 30 years old and serving as Executive Vice President of Creative Development, recorded one of the most emotionally exposed segments in the entire broadcast. She had known Benoit for years through her work at WWE. She was a new mother herself. Aurora Rose had been born in 2006, and the experience of parenthood had deepened her empathy for colleagues who talked about their families. She spoke about Benoit with unmistakable, unguarded grief.
Chris Benoit was an amazing wrestler. You'll hear a lot of people say it, and I'm sure all of you watching tonight know it. He was passionate.
She went on to describe personal moments she had shared with him, how Benoit had congratulated her on her marriage to Triple H, how excited he seemed when talking about their future family. Stephanie, who had just become a mother the year before, these memories carried a particular resonance. She was not speaking as an executive delivering a corporate message. She was speaking as a friend, as a parent, as someone who believed she understood the man behind the performer.
Like that, he was so warm, and emotional.
The weight of her own motherhood was visible in how she talked about Benoit's relationship with his kids. She described how his children worshipped him. She fought back tears on camera, her voice breaking as she recalled memories of a man she believed, sincerely at that moment, was a devoted father and a loyal friend.
And I will always know him as my friend.
What Stephanie did not know, what no one at WWE fully understood while the cameras were rolling, was that Chris Benoit had murdered his wife and his 7-year-old son before taking his own life. The very qualities she had praised on national television, his devotion to his family, his warmth as a father, his love for his children, were now part of a narrative that was the exact opposite of what she had described. She had not told a lie. She had told the truth as she understood it. But the truth she understood was built on an illusion that collapsed within hours of the broadcast. By the end of the Raw tribute, media outlets including ESPN were reporting the deaths as homicides. The full confirmation came overnight. Stephanie McMahon had gone on national television, wept openly for a man she called her friend, praised his love for the family he had killed, and done so in front of millions of people who would soon learn what she did not yet know: the erasure and the aftermath. The reversal from WWE was swift, comprehensive, and total. On the following night's ECW broadcast on June 26th, Vince McMahon addressed the audience in a pre-taped statement and declared that other than his comments, there would be no mention of Benoit's name. He said the show would instead be dedicated to everyone affected by the tragedy. He called it the first step of a healing process. What followed was not healing in any conventional sense. It was the systematic removal of a person from an institution's history. WWE removed all references to Benoit from their website, except for bare-bones title history entries. Reign summaries were deleted. The tribute episode, the very broadcast that featured Stephanie's tearful, gut-wrenching eulogy, alongside career highlights and remembrances from dozens of colleagues, was pulled from replays. It never aired again. It was excluded from the WWE Network archives, and later from Peacock when WWE's content library migrated to that platform. Benoit's merchandise was pulled from shelves and discontinued. His name became something the company simply did not say. Not in commentary, not in promotional materials, not in DVDs, not in online content. This was not a temporary cooling-off period. This policy persists to this day, nearly 2 decades after the events. In a June 27th news release, WWE defended the tribute by citing limited knowledge at the time, but critics maintained the company had moved forward too hastily. Several prominent wrestlers had warned Vince backstage during the broadcast itself. Early indicators of foul play had been circulating before the show even finished airing. The decision to run the tribute, while understandable given the chaos and grief of that evening, became a lasting blemish on WWE's reputation for crisis management, and Stephanie's segment became one of its most painful remnants. For Stephanie, the fallout reached far deeper than corporate reputation. Her eulogy, intended as a sincere, heartfelt tribute from one colleague to another, from one parent to another, had been transformed into something she could never take back, never fully explain, and never revisit without confronting the dissonance between what she said and what had actually happened. She had praised a murderer's love for his children on national television, while those children's bodies were already at the medical examiner's office. Her eulogy became painful to revisit once the murder-suicide was revealed, and Stephanie has rarely spoken publicly about the Benoit incident since. But the consequences of the tragedy extended well beyond personal grief and into a reckoning the wrestling industry had spent decades avoiding. Autopsies conducted in the weeks following the deaths revealed that Benoit's brain showed severe damage consistent with chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, and his brain was likened to that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The condition, caused by repeated concussions accumulated over decades of high-impact in-ring work, including Benoit's signature diving headbutt, which he performed hundreds of times throughout his career, can produce aggression, depression, memory loss, paranoia, and catastrophically impaired judgment. Toxicology reports also showed elevated testosterone levels consistent with steroid use, though no alcohol or recreational drugs were found in his system. CTE could not excuse what Benoit did. Nothing could, but it reframed the tragedy as something the wrestling industry itself had, in significant part, manufactured through decades of unregulated physicality, a culture that glorified performing through injuries, and a near-total absence of long-term medical oversight for the men and women who put their bodies on the line every night. The event likely contributed to Stephanie's advocacy for wrestler wellness, as she helped strengthen WWE's wellness policy post-2007, implementing stricter drug testing and concussion protocols. WWE also banned chair shots to the head and expanded its medical screening procedures. But critics pointed out that these reforms were entirely reactive, that the company had ignored decades of warning signs, including the death of Eddie Guerrero from heart failure in 2005, the in-ring death of Owen Hart in 1999, and a long, devastating roster of performers who died young from the accumulated physical toll of the profession. For Stephanie McMahon, the Benoit tragedy was the collision of every pressure she had navigated her entire life. The family business demanded she appear on camera, grieve publicly, and do so without complete information. When the information arrived, it turned her sincerity into something she would carry for the rest of her career, a wound that could not be undone by erasure, apology, or the passage of time. The cost of being a McMahon. The incest storyline pitch and the Benoit eulogy are the two most visible inflection points in Stephanie McMahon's story, but they are symptoms of a larger condition, the total, all-consuming fusion of family and business that defined the McMahon dynasty and shaped every dimension of Stephanie's professional and personal existence. In a standard corporate environment, a father proposing a storyline about impregnating his daughter would trigger immediate institutional intervention, from HR, from legal counsel, from any number of organizational safeguards designed to prevent exactly that kind of boundary violation. In the McMahon family business, it was a creative meeting. Stephanie's rejection of the pitch was framed by Vince in the documentary with a casual laugh as just another idea that didn't make the cut, another brainstorm that fizzled out. The machinery of WWE was engineered to normalize the extraordinary, to treat the outrageous as routine, to make the deeply uncomfortable feel like just another day in the writer's room. And Stephanie lived inside that machinery from the day she was born. Vince's role as both father and boss created an imbalance, making it difficult for Stephanie or Shane to push back without risking professional repercussions. This was the fundamental tension woven through every chapter of Stephanie's career. She could say no to a storyline, and she did forcefully and unambiguously in 2006. But she could not extricate herself from the system that produced such pitches in the first place. The system was her family. The system was her inheritance. The system was the only professional world she had ever inhabited, the only framework she had for understanding what work meant and what family looked like when those two things were permanently fused together. That imbalance shaped the texture of Stephanie's entire on-screen history in ways that are difficult to overstate. In 2003, 6 days before her real wedding, Vince booked the I Quit match against her at No Mercy, where he bloodied her on camera. In the late 1990s, the Higher Power storyline revealed Vince as the mastermind behind Stephanie's own kidnapping, a narrative that twisted a father's protective instinct into orchestrated betrayal, all for the sake of a dramatic reveal on a Monday night broadcast. These storylines were not aberrations. They were the natural product of a creative philosophy that viewed family bonds as raw material, to be mined, shaped, and manufactured into content whenever the ratings demanded it. In the years following the Benoit tragedy, Stephanie rose through WWE's corporate hierarchy with a sense of purpose that suggested she was building something different from the culture she had inherited. She became chief brand officer. She championed what the company called the Women's Revolution, a sweeping initiative that gave female performers longer matches, more prominent storylines, and narratives built on athletic accomplishment rather than sexual objectification. It was a meaningful departure from the Attitude Era ethos that had defined her early career, and Stephanie was one of its most passionate internal advocates. Championship divisions were expanded. Female performers were treated, on screen at least, as athletes first, not props for the male roster. But even that hard-won progress existed within the lengthening shadow of her father's legacy. In 2022, a sex trafficking lawsuit was filed against Vince McMahon, which led to his resignation from the company. The allegations were devastating, not just for Vince personally, but for the institution he had built and the family whose name was permanently stitched into its identity. Stephanie briefly stepped in as co-CEO alongside Nick Khan. It was the moment she had, in many ways, been preparing for her entire life. The chance to lead the company without her father's direct oversight, to steer the enterprise on her own terms, to demonstrate that the McMahon name could mean something other than controversy. It did not last. Stephanie resigned from her position in 2023 amid Vince's attempted return to the company. The precise internal dynamics of her departure remain layered with corporate maneuvering and family politics that may never be fully transparent to the public, but the result was unmistakable. Stephanie McMahon left the company her family had built and operated for over 4 decades. WWE was subsequently folded into TKO Group Holdings, a merger with UFC under the Endeavor umbrella. The McMahon era, the era of a single family and an unwillingness to separate blood from business, business was over. Shane McMahon's trajectory told a parallel, quieter story. He had maintained a more distant relationship with WWE for years, channeling his energy into independent business ventures outside the family orbit. His returns to WWE programming were sporadic, each one framed as an invasion or a dramatic comeback, but his day-to-day involvement had diminished long before the company changed ownership. He had found distance. Stephanie, by contrast, McMahon family's story is, at its foundation, a story about what happens when there is no boundary between the personal and the professional, when the family is the business and the business is the family, and neither institution can exist without devouring the other. Stephanie McMahon participated in storylines that used her real relationships as material. She eulogized a colleague on national television without knowing the truth about what he had done. She built a career in a company where her father could pitch the most transgressive storylines imaginable and treat them as routine creative brainstorming. She rose to the top of that company, briefly held the reins, and then walked away. The 2024 Mr. McMahon docuseries laid much of this bare for public consumption, presenting the McMahon dynasty in all its fascinating, disturbing complexity. Viewers who had spent decades watching the McMahons on television were, for the first time, seeing what the cameras had never been intended to capture. Not the scripted drama, but the real human cost of living inside a story that never ended. But for Stephanie, none of it was new information. She had lived every frame of it, from the board meetings she attended as a child, to the storylines that exploited her pregnancy, to the eulogy she wishes she had never given, to the resignation letter she eventually signed. The tragic fate of Stephanie McMahon is not a single event. It is the accumulated weight of a life spent inside a system that consumed everything it touched. Relationships, boundaries, grief, joy, pregnancy, marriage, friendship, and loss, including ultimately the family that created it. That wraps up this video. For more interesting videos like this, check out the cards on your screen.